La Morte d'Arthur, originally written as La Morte d'Arthur, Anglo-Norman French for The Death of Arthur, 1, is a 15th-century Middle English prose reworking by Sir Thomas Malory of tales about the legendary King Arthur, Guinevere, Lancelot, Merlin and the Knights of the Round Table, along with their respective folklore. In order to tell a complete story of Arthur from his conception to his death, Malory compiled, rearranged, interpreted and modified material from various French and English sources. Today, this is one of the best-known works of Arthurian literature. Many authors since the 19th century revival of the legend have used Malory as their principal source. Sir Thomas Malory was an English writer, the author of La Morte d'Arthur, the classic English-language chronicle of the Arthurian legend, compiled and in most cases translated from French sources. The most popular version of La Morte d'Arthur was published by the famed London printer William Caxton in 1485. Much of Malory's life history is obscure, but he identified himself as a knight prisoner, apparently reflecting that he was either a criminal, a prisoner of war, or suffering some other type of confinement. Malory's identity has never been confirmed. Since modern scholars began researching his identity, the most widely accepted candidate has been Sir Thomas Malory of Newbold Revel in Warwickshire, who was imprisoned at various times for criminal acts and possibly also for political reasons during the Wars of the Roses. Recent work by Cecilia Lamp Linton, however, presents new evidence in support of Thomas Malory of Hutton Conyers, Yorkshire. 1. Middle English, abbreviated to ME1, is a form of the English language that was spoken after the Norman conquest of 1066, until the late 15th century. The English language underwent distinct variations and developments following the Old English period. Scholarly opinion varies, but Oxford University Press specifies the period when Middle English was spoken as being from 1100 to 1500. 2. This stage of the development of the English language roughly followed the high to the late Middle Ages. As a literary genre, the chivalric romance is a type of prose and verse narrative that was popular in the noble courts of high medieval and early modern Europe. They were fantastic stories about marvel-filled adventures, often of a chivalric knight-errant portrayed as having heroic qualities, who goes on a quest. It developed further from the epics as time went on. In particular, the emphasis on love and courtly manners distinguishes it from the chanson de geste and other kinds of epic, in which masculine military heroism predominates. 1. Apparently written in prison at the end of the medieval English era, La Morte d'Arthur was completed by Malory around 1470 and was first published in a printed edition in 1485 by William Caxton. Until the discovery of the Winchester manuscript in 1934, the 1485 edition was considered the earliest known text of La Morte d'Arthur and that closest to Malory's original version. 2 modern editions under myriad titles are inevitably variable, changing spelling, grammar and pronouns for the convenience of readers of modern English, as well as often abridging or revising the material. Book 1, Caxton IV. Arthur is born to the High King of Britain Malory's, England, Uther Pendragon and his new wife Igraine, and then taken by the wizard Merlin to be secretly fostered by Sir Ector in the country in turmoil after the death of Uther. Years later, the now teenage Arthur suddenly becomes the ruler of the leaderless Britain when he removes the fated sword from the stone in the contest set up by Merlin, which proves his birthright that he himself had not been aware of. The newly crowned King Arthur and his followers including King Ban and King Bors go on to fight against rivals and rebels, ultimately winning the war in the Great Battle of Bedegraine. Arthur prevails due to his military prowess and the prophetic and magical counsel of Merlin, later replaced by the sorceress Nimue, further helped by the sword Excalibur that Arthur received from a lady of the lake. With the help of reconciled rebels, Arthur also crushes a foreign invasion in the Battle of Clarence. With his throne secure, Arthur marries the also young Princess Guinevere and inherits the Round Table from her father, King Leodegrance. He then gathers his chief knights, including some of his former enemies who now joined him, at his capital Camelot and establishes the Round Table Fellowship as all swear to the Pentecostal oath as a guide for knightly conduct. The narrative of Malory's first book is mainly based on the prose Merlin in its version from the post-Vulgate Suite du Merlin, more specifically, possibly on the manuscript Cambridge University Library, additional 7071-46. 1.5. It also includes the tale of Balin and Balin, a lengthy section which Malory called a book in itself, as well as other episodes such as the hunt, the questing beast and the treason of Arthur's sorceress half-sister Queen Morgan le Fay in the plot involving her lover Accolin. Furthermore, it tells of begetting of Arthur's incestuous son Mordred by one of his other royal half-sisters, Morgause, though Arthur did not know her as his sister. On Merlin's advice, Arthur then takes every newborn boy in his kingdom and all but Mordred, who miraculously survives and eventually indeed kills his father in the end, perish at sea. This is mentioned matter of fact, with no apparent moral overtone. Malory addresses his contemporary preoccupations with legitimacy and societal unrest, which will appear throughout the rest of Le Morte d'Arthur. 47. According to Helen Cooper in Sir Thomas Malory, Le Morte d'Arthur, the Winchester manuscript, the prose style, which mimics historical documents of the time, lends an air of authority to the whole work. This allowed contemporaries to read the book as a history rather than as a work of fiction, therefore making it a model of order for Malory's violent and chaotic times during the Wars of the Roses. Malory's concern with legitimacy reflects 15th century England, where many were claiming their rights to power through violence and bloodshed. Book 2, Caxton v. The opening of the second volume finds Arthur and his kingdom without an enemy. His throne is secure, and his knights including Griflet and Tor as well as Arthur's own nephews Gawain and Uwaine, sons of Morgause and Morgan, respectively, have proven themselves in various battles and fantastic quests as told in the first volume. Seeking more glory, Arthur and his knights then go to the war against fictitious Emperor Lucius, who has just demanded Britain to resume paying tribute. Departing from Geoffrey of Monmouth's literary tradition in which Mordred is left in charge, as this happens there near the end of the story, Malory's Arthur leaves his court in the hands of Constantine of Cornwall and sails to Normandy to meet his cousin Hull. After that, the story details Arthur's march on Rome through Almaine, Germany, and Italy. Following a series of battles resulting in the great victory over Lucius and his allies, and the Roman Senate's surrender, Arthur is crowned a Western emperor but instead arranges a proxy government and returns to Britain. This book is based mostly on the first half of the Middle English heroic poem alliterative Morte d'Arthur, itself heavily based on Geoffrey's pseudo-chronicle Historia Regum Britanniae. Caxton's print version is abridged by more than half compared to Malory's manuscript. 48. Benaver theorized that Malory originally wrote this part first as a standalone work, while without knowledge of French romances. 49. In effect, there is a time lapse that includes Arthur's war with King Claude as in France. Book 3, Caxton v. Going back to a time before Book 2, Malory establishes Sir Lancelot, a young French orphan prince, as King Arthur's most revered knight through numerous episodic adventures, some of which he presented in comedic manner. 50. Lancelot always adheres to the Pentecostal oath, assisting ladies in distress and giving mercy for honorable enemies he has defeated in combat. However, the world Lancelot lives in is too complicated for simple mandates and, although Lancelot aspires to live by an ethical code, the actions of others make it difficult. Other issues are demonstrated when Morgan Le Fay enchants Lancelot, which reflects a feminization of magic, and in how the prominence of jousting tournament fighting in this tale indicates a shift away from battlefield warfare towards a more mediated and virtuous form of violence. Lancelot's character had previously appeared in the chronologically later Book 2, fighting for Arthur against the Romans. In Book 3, based on parts of the French prose Lancelot, mostly its Agravain section, along with the Chapel Perilous episode taken from Prosvos 1551-52, Malory attempts to turn the focus of courtly love from adultery to service by having Lancelot dedicate doing everything he does for Queen Guinevere, the wife of his lord and friend Arthur, but avoid for a time being to committing to an adulterous relationship with her. Nevertheless, it is still her love that is the ultimate source of Lancelot's supreme knightly qualities, something that Malory himself did not appear to be fully comfortable with, as it seems to have clashed with his personal ideal of knighthood. 53. Although a catalyst of the fall of Camelot, as it was in the French Romantic prose cycle tradition, the moral handling of the adultery between Lancelot and Guinevere in Le Morte implies their relationship is true and pure, as Malory focused on the ennobling aspects of courtly love. Book 4, Caxton 7. The fourth volume primarily deals with the adventures of the young Gareth Beaumains, in his long quest for the sibling ladies Lynette and Lyonesse. The youngest of Arthur's nephews by Morgause and Lot, Gareth hides his identity as a nameless squire at Camelot as to achieve his knighthood in the most honest and honorable way. 54. While this particular story is not directly based on any existing text, unlike most of the content of previous volumes, it resembles various Arthurian romances of the fair unknown type. 55. Book 5, Caxton 812. Edit. A collection of the tales about Sir Tristan of Lyonesse as well as a variety of other knights such as Sir Dinadan, Sir Lamoric, Sir Palamedes, Sir Alexander the Orphan, Tristan's young relative abducted by Morgan, and Le Cote de Mail tale. After telling of Tristan's birth and childhood, its primary focus is on the doomed adulterous relationship between Tristan and the Belle Isolde, wife of his villainous uncle King Mark. It also includes the retrospective story of how Sir Galahad was born to Sir Lancelot and Princess Elaine of Corbenic, followed by Lancelot's years of madness. Based mainly on the French vast prose Tristan, or its lost English adaptation, and possibly also the Middle English verse romance Sir Tristram 56, Malory's treatment of the legend of the young Cornish prince Tristan is the centerpiece of Le Morte d'Arthur as well as the longest of his 8 books. The variety of episodes and the alleged lack of coherence in the Tristan narrative raise questions about its role in Malory's text. However, the book foreshadows the rest of the text as well as including and interacting with characters and tales discussed in other parts of the work. It can be seen as an exploration of secular chivalry and a discussion of honor or worship, when it is founded in a sense of shame and pride. If Le Morte is viewed as a text in which Malory is attempting to define the concept of knighthood, then the tale of Tristan becomes its critique, rather than Malory attempting to create an ideal knight as he does in some of the other books. Book 6, Caxton 1317. Malory's primary source for this long part was the Vulgate quest del Saint Graal, chronicling the adventures of many knights in their spiritual quest to achieve the Holy Grail. Gawain is the first to embark on the quest for the Grail. Other knights like Lancelot, Percival, and Bors the Younger, likewise undergo the quest, eventually achieved by Galahad. Their exploits are intermingled with encounters with maidens and hermits who offer advice and interpret dreams along the way. After the confusion of the secular moral code he manifested within the previous book, Malory attempts to construct a new mode of chivalry by placing an emphasis on religion. Christianity and the Church offer a venue through which the Pentecostal oath can be upheld, whereas the strict moral code imposed by religion foreshadows almost certain failure on the part of the knights. For instance, Gawain refuses to do penance for his sins, claiming the tribulations that coexist with knighthood as sort of secular penance. Likewise, the flawed Lancelot, for all his sincerity, is unable to completely escape his adulterous love of Guinevere, and is thus destined to fail where Galahad will succeed. This coincides with the personification of perfection in the form of Galahad, a virgin wielding the power of God. Galahad's life, uniquely entirely without sin, makes him a model of a holy knight that cannot be emulated through secular chivalry. Book 7, Caxton 1819. Edit. The continued story of Lancelot's romance with Guinevere. Lancelot completes a series of trials to prove being worthy of the Queen's love, culminating in his rescue of her from the abduction by the renegade knight Maleagant. This is also the first time the work explicitly mentions the couple's sexual adultery. Writing it, Malory combined the established material from the Vulgate Cycles prose Lancelot, including the story of the Fair Maiden of Ascolot and an abridged retelling of Lancelot, the Knight of the Cart, with his own creations, the episodes, The Great Tournament, and The Healing of Sir Uri. 57-58. Book 8, Caxton XX 21. Mordred and his half-brother Igravain succeed in revealing Guinevere's adultery and Arthur sentences her to burn. Lancelot's rescue party raids the execution, killing several loyal knights of the Round Table, including Gawain's brothers Gareth and Gaheris. Gawain, bent on revenge, prompts Arthur into a long and bitter war with Lancelot. After they leave to pursue Lancelot in France, where Gawain is mortally injured in a duel with Lancelot, and later finally reconciles with him on his deathbed, Mordred seizes the throne and takes control of Arthur's kingdom. At the bloody final battle between Mordred's followers and Arthur's remaining loyalists in England, Arthur kills Mordred but is himself gravely wounded. As Arthur is dying, the lone survivor Bedivere casts Excalibur away, and Morgan and Nimue come together to take Arthur to Avalon. Following the passing of King Arthur, who is succeeded by Constantine, Malory provides a denouement about the later deaths of Bedivere, Guinevere, and Lancelot and his kinsmen. Writing the eponymous final book, Malory used the version of Arthur's death derived primarily from parts of the Vulgate Morte d'Arthur and, as a secondary source, 59 from the English stanzaic Morte d'Arthur, or, in another possibility, a hypothetical now lost French modification of the Morte d'Arthur was a common source of both of these texts. 60. In the words of George Brown, the book celebrates the greatness of the Arthurian world on the eve of its ruin. As the magnificent fellowship turns violently upon itself, death and destruction also produce repentance, forgiveness, and salvation. 6.1. The exact identity of the author of Le Morte d'Arthur has long been the subject of speculation, owing to the fact that at least 6 historical figures bore the name of Sir Thomas Malory in various spellings during the late 15th century. 3. In the work, the author describes himself as Knight Prisoner Thomas Malory, Sir Thomas Malory, according to the publisher William Caxton. Historically, this has been taken as supporting evidence for the identification most widely accepted by scholars, that the author was Thomas Malory of Newbold Revel of Newbold Revel, Warwickshire, 4-5, son of Sir John Malory. According to the timeline proposed by P.J.C. Field, Sir Thomas of Newbold Revel inherited the family estate in 1434, but by 1450 he was fully engaged in a life of crime. As early as 1433, he had been accused of theft, but the more serious allegations against him included that of the attempted murder of Humphrey Stafford, 1st Duke of Buckingham, an accusation of at least 2 rapes, and that he had attacked and robbed Combe Abbey. Malory was first arrested and imprisoned in 1451 for the ambush of Buckingham, but was released early in 1452. By March, he was back in the Marshalsea prison and then in Colchester, escaping on multiple occasions. In 1461, he was granted a pardon by King Henry VI, returning to live at his estate. After 1461, few records survive which scholars agree refer to Malory of Newbold Revel. In 1468-1470, King Edward IV issued 4 more general pardons which specifically excluded a Thomas Malory. The first of these names Malory a knight, and applied to participants in a campaign in Northumberland in the north of England by members of the Lancastrian faction. Field interprets these pardon exclusions to refer to Malory of Newbold Revel, suggesting that Malory changed his allegiance from York to Lancaster, and that he was involved in a conspiracy with Richard Neville, 16th Earl of Warwick, to overthrow King Edward. William Matthews, having given evidence of this candidate's advanced age at the time of the Northumberland campaign and living much further to the south, interprets this record as referring to his own proposed candidate for authorship. Field proposed that it was during a final stint at Newgate Prison in London that he wrote Le Morte d'Arthur, 6, and that Malory was released in October 1470 when Henry VI returned to the throne, dying only 5 months later. 4. This Warwickshire knight was widely accepted as the author of the Morte until the publication of Matthews' research in 1966. This candidate's advanced age at the time the work was written is now generally recognized as a serious problem, citation needed, and his history and character stand in contradiction to the work itself. This identification was widely accepted through most of the 20th century based on the assumption that this candidate was born around 1416. The 1416 date was proposed by Field, contradicting the original record of this knight's military service record by Dugdale. 7. In 1966, Matthews published original research demonstrating that Malory of Newbold Revel had in fact been an officer under King Henry V in the famous Agincourt campaign by 1414 or 1415, confirming Dugdale's original record and placing this knight's birth around 1393. Late 20th century researchers who generally acknowledged that this would make the Newbold Revel knight far too old to have written Le Morte, in prison in his mid-70s to early 80s, when, in Matthews' words, the medieval view was that by 60 a man was bean fodder and forage, ready for nothing but death's pit. 8. Because no other contemporary Thomas Malory had been shown to have been knighted, the question remained unresolved. The second candidate to receive scholarly support as the possible author of Le Morte d'Arthur is Thomas Malory of Papworth St Agnes in Huntingdonshire, whose will, written in Latin and dated the 16th of September 1469, was described in an article by T. A. Martin in the Athenaeum magazine in September 1897. 9. This Malory was born in Shropshire in 1425, the son of Sir William Malory. Although there is no indication in the will that he was himself a knight, he died within 6 weeks of the will being made. It has been suggested that the fact that he appears to have been brought up in Lincolnshire may account for the traces of Lincolnshire dialect in Le Morte d'Arthur. 10. To date, this candidate has not commanded the attention of scholars as the Newbold Revel knight has. The most recent contender for authorship emerged in the mid-20th century, Thomas Malory of Hutton Conyers and Studley Royal in Yorkshire. This claim was put forward in 1966 in The Ill-Framed Knight, a skeptical inquiry into the identity of Sir Thomas Malory by William Matthews. 11. Matthews' primary arguments in favor of the Yorkshire Malory were the northerly dialect of the Morte, the likelihood that this is the Malory who was excluded from the pardon by Edward IV in 1468, and the fact that the Newbold Revel knight was far too old to be writing the Morte in the late 1460s. Matthews' interpretation was not widely accepted, primarily because he could not find evidence that the Yorkshireman was a knight. Cecilia Lamp Linton, however, has provided extensive detail about the Malorys of Yorkshire and offered evidence that Thomas of Yorkshire was a knight hospitaller, a knight of the church. 12. She has also examined the provenance of some of the known sources of the Morte and has demonstrated that this Malory would have had ready access to these documents. If we accept Linton's evidence, the primary objection to his authorship is removed, and the contradictions presented by the Newbold Revel Knight become irrelevant. The Morte itself seems to be much more the work of a knight of the church than a secular repeat offender, as evidenced by Malory's own conclusion rendered in modern English: "Pray for me while I am in life, that God send me good deliverance, and when I am dead I pray you all pray for my soul." For this book was ended the 9th year of the reign of King Edward IV by Sir Thomas Malory, Knight, as Jesus help him by his great might, as he is the servant of Jesus both day and night. Le Morte d'Arthur was completed in 1469 or 1470, the 9th year of the reign of King Edward IV, according to a note at the end of the book. 18. It is believed that Malory's original title intended was to be the whole book of King Arthur and of his noble knights of the Round Table, and only its final section to be named Le Morte d'Arthur. 19. At the end of the work, Caxton added, "Thus endeth this noble and joyous book entitled Le Morte d'Arthur, notwithstanding it treateth of the birth, life, and acts of the said King Arthur, of his noble knights of the Round Table, their merewilous enquests and adventures, the chiong of the Sangreal, and in then the dolorous death and departing out of this world of the Mal." Caxton separated Malory's 8 books into 21 books, subdivided the books into a total of 506 chapters, and added a summary of each chapter as well as a colophon to the entire book. 21. The first printing of Malory's work was made by Caxton in 1485, becoming one of the first books to be ever printed in England. 22. Only 2 copies of this original printing are known to exist, in the collections of the Morgan Library and Museum in New York and the John Rylands Library in Manchester. 23. It proved popular and was reprinted in an illustrated form with some additions and changes in 1498, the Boke of King Arthur sometime King of England and his noble acts and feats of arms of chivalry, and 1529, the Boke of the most noble and worthy Prince King Arthur sometime King of Greta Britain now called England by Wynkyn de Worde, who succeeded to Caxton's press. 3 more editions were published before the English Civil War. William Copland's The Story of the Most Noble and Worthy King Arthur 1557, Thomas East's The Story of King Arthur, and also of his Knights of the Round Table 1585, and William Stansby's The Most Ancient and Famous History of the Renowned Prince Arthur King of Britain 1634, each of which contained additional changes and errors. Stansby's edition, based on East's, was also deliberately censored. 24. Thereafter, the book went out of fashion until the Romanticist revival of interest in all things medieval. The British Library summarizes the importance of Malory's work thus: "It was probably always a popular work, it was first printed by William Caxton, and has been read by generations of readers ever since." In a literary sense, Malory's text is the most important of all the treatments of Arthurian legend in English language, influencing writers as diverse as Edmund Spenser, Alfred, Lord Tennyson, Mark Twain and John Steinbeck. 19.